Hi everybody, I'm Alex and I welcome you once again to a new episode of Deep Tech. Today we are going to discuss state-sponsored hacking. To go in depth in this manner, I have a very special guest once again, my good friend Jean-Michel Azzopardi, CCO of Infrinity.
Yes, sir.
All right, it's nice to have you again.
Thank you for having me.
We had a great conversation last week about DOS and DDoS attacks. So today, let's take on governments.
Let's do it.
That's fun, huh?
Let's do it. Sure.
All right. So SolarWinds, that was quite an interesting attack. Maybe you can describe to our audience how this happened.
Sure. So from my understanding, the SolarWinds attack was a question of infiltrating the patching mechanism from directly within SolarWinds and pushing out a malicious patch. And if I'm not mistaken, I think the patch had to be manually installed, right?
That's correct. It was not, you could not do it through an automatic download or update. It's usually a patch that SolarWinds sends to its customers manually. So obviously with a spoofing email, you could say, here's a patch to install, and you corrupt your own system.
Yeah, so those poor guys who were running for patch management were like, okay, there's a new patch, let's do it. Boom, just kill the network.
Exactly. So what's the way to defend against this kind of thing? Are we going to have to start mitigating this by, segregating systems and testing the patches in a segregated environment before we go live?
I mean, look, technically, that's a good solution, a pretty good solution. The only problem is that it's extremely resource intensive. And cybersecurity already has very limited resources allocated to it when compared to other departments. So while it's a good source in theory, in principle, it doesn't really apply if you ask me. That's my personal opinion. The reality is there are certain vendors that we trust by default. Like we trust Microsoft, we trust Apple, and we should trust companies like SolarWinds and FireEye, etc. And those are just assumptions and risks that we have to take in order to maintain a healthy amount of security hygiene, because you need to at least understand that your bases are covered before you can start working above the foundation. So I personally don't think there's anything that you can do that's feasible to be able to prevent against that sort of breach.
So this attack was basically successful because it was related to human error, most probably.
Yes, human error, but also trust in the vendor, right? I mean, like take patching, for example, right? Everyone knows that it's a best practice to update and patch any bit of software you've got as quickly as possible. So what we're saying is, listen, that's not the ideal solution. There are better ways to do it, but in doing so, it's going to cost so much resources, so much time, so much delay that the process of going through that just outweighs the rewards.
What's particularly nasty in the SolarWinds attack is that SolarWinds is usually a system that is not exposed to the web. It's behind your firewall internally. But why is hacking SolarWinds so damaging to government organizations? What does that software do, and what kind of information does it give the attacker?
So SolarWinds, from what I understand, offers a suite of different products. It's not just the one, right? And it's important to consider SolarWinds like an organ for the body that is the West, right? And there's a reason why you'll never find an organ like Kaspersky within an American government organization, because the body just wouldn't accept it and it would reject it, right? So being able to essentially hijack a vital organ, it could give you control over the host.
Yeah, because it's a software that basically maps your complete network. It's going to give you all the IP ranges within the company. It's going to be able to list every software and server that you have, what kind of patches have been made on these servers, so you can actually locate flaws. And if you know that one server has not been updated with a specific patch, you have the ability to attack it, because through SolarWinds you know that it hasn't been applied.
Exactly, it's like recon wet dream. It's basically what it is, no?
Yeah. So when we come to the Exchange server hack that was done by the Chinese, we don't have the motive behind this, if not for getting information about, what's the content of the emails and the information exchanged between high-level people within large companies and government officials. But in this case, they attacked it through the web. They used the Outlook web access, and they found a flaw in the OA to access it.
Because OA is publicly facing, right? I mean, that's the whole point of OA.
Exactly. So what can be the purpose of hacking? I think the number was between 10 and 30,000 servers that have been hacked. I think the latest numbers that came out in March were at 30,000 servers attacked. That's a tremendously big number.
Well, I mean, the purpose is multifaceted, right? I mean, you could grab the data and you can sell it on the Darknet to competitors, or you can use it as a form of ransom and demand ransom from the person who you've stolen from. Like, if you're stealing data from a company that's especially large, for example, that company might not want to disclose to the local data commissioner that they've been breached straight up. So maybe if you can tell them, hey, listen, give me 30, 40 grand and I won't, and this stays a little secret between me and you. Then some companies might say yes. Like, ultimately, it only takes one. Hacking at the end of the day is a numbers game. It's like with the Nigerian phone scam, right? You're gonna shoot it out to like hundreds of thousands of people, but it just takes one or two to be able to pay, the livelihood of a Nigerian family for X number of months.
Yeah, and this is a good point, because we do have to mention that currently we know that this comes from China, but we don't know if that attack was done by a private company, if it's done by a privately held company but with government implication, because we know that the Chinese force every company to share their information with them, or if it's directly the Chinese government that sponsored this attack. So this stays, for now, we don't have the answers to that.
The thing is this, to interject here for a second. The thing is this, in state-sponsored espionage, it's commonplace to be able to tamper with your trail as a hacker, to be able to mimic other countries. And so if you're the Chinese government, or if you're a private Chinese hacking group, you're obviously going to try and pin it on someone else. So you're going to make it look like the Russians did it. Or you're going to make it look like, I don't know, the Koreans did it, for example, because that's obviously what you would do. So whenever I hear that a specific organization has been identified as a perpetrator for a specific hack, it makes me question.
To discuss the motives behind this, I'll give you my opinion, you'll tell me what you think about it. If we take, for example, the Russians, I think that their interest is strategic. They wish to infiltrate government agencies because they want to have a network map, they want to understand what kind of servers they're running, and the objective is that in case of a war, they would have the ability to shut down those systems, shut down a power grid, and have strategic advantage, especially in the case of first strike, for example. So you would render your opponent completely blind. In the case of the Chinese, it seems to me like they have been ramping up their military efforts lately. And the State Department in the US declared that they feel that maybe in the next year or so, they intend to invade Taiwan and take it back. So the military advantage is not as much as a concern for the Chinese. It appears to me that the Chinese would tend to hack American companies or government because it's easier for them to just steal the technology and the knowledge to catch up maybe on the delay, or to see if at least they're up to par with what the US is doing.
Sure. As far as your Russian argument goes, I tend to agree with you entirely. I think that New Age wars aren't fought with nukes or soldiers; they're fought with hackers, because hackers are something you can hide and obfuscate. In the case of China, I tend to disagree. I think up until maybe 6 years ago, I'd say your argument was pretty valid. But in the last couple of years, China has really taken the world by storm as far as tech goes. And the reason is really, really simple. That they don't have any of the ethical limitations that we do in the West. They can do whatever they want with AI. Whatever they want, doesn't matter. Because they're China, and because China says so. In the West, we're still figuring out like what those ethical boundaries of AI look like, right? And AI, like in the hacking world, is arguably the most powerful weapon you can probably have if you train the machine learning and the deep learning models in the right way. Mm-hmm. So, and they've got the data at the end of the day. Now they're a billion people. So it's my experience that China are very much advanced, and what their motivation may be is a little tough. I'm saddened to hear about Taiwan. I've been there and I love the place, and same with Hong Kong, which is also a damn shame. No one knows what to really expect from China. You can't trust any of the Western news that comes out on China, or the news that China themselves publish, right?
You took the words right out of my mouth. That's exactly what I was going to say. We can't trust any of the news outlets now. So, you try to forge yourself an opinion by looking at RT, Russian television, and then you look at CNN, which is more leftist Democrat. You look at Fox News, which now want to be a counterbalance of the Democrats, and they're right wing. And you have more extremists like Newsmax and other more right wing.
Breitbart and
You have Al Jazeera. So it's really hard to get a clear picture, especially that maybe us in the Western world we're going to be influenced by the fact that just about like the Americans, where they've always had the mentality that they're the gendarme, they're the policeman of the world, so they're righteous and the others are not. I don't think it's particularly the case.
Not at all. I mean, like, the only reason why we think the Americans are righteous at the end of the day is because of the cinema world and the movie world, right? It's because Americans are portrayed as heroes, and they're the sort of free saviors of speech and democracy, and China is the root of all evil. Because of course it is, because that's the sort of
discourse.
Discourse, yeah, that they're sort of
promoting.
Yeah. Whether that's the reality or not, I think is entirely different. But I think it's foolish to believe that the US don't attempt to brainwash the West in the same way that China brainwashes the East.
Yeah. Now, when we talk, for example, about North Korea, their main activity has been mining cryptocurrency, but also trying to push some ransomware, because they want to get around, I think, the US embargo, and they need money to finance the regime. And as well as, for example, in the case of Sony, to punish them for taking out a movie to mocking their dear leader.
Of course.
So what's your take on North Korea?
I mean, let's talk about Sony first, because I think Sony is like a really interesting point. I think Sony have had a combination of the worst luck in the world as far as cyber goes, and just complete incompetence, right? The amount of times Sony has been hacked in the past 7 years blows my mind. And the fact that they're still up and running and they still haven't done anything about it just goes to show that if you're a stockholder, just be a little careful. That's all I'm saying, right? That's my opinion on that. North Korea, I mean, obviously they've committed some terrible atrocities.
Let me check on the Dow Jones if you just crashed.
I don't think I'm that famous yet, and hopefully will never be. But as far as North Korea goes, they've committed some horrible crimes against humanity. But props to them, they figured out a way to get around the U.S. embargo, which I think is something that most countries have failed to do in the past. So as far as that goes, like you have to respect them. At the same time, you have to understand that they also have no limits, and they also don't understand the concept of ethics, because it's a full-on dictatorship. Of course they don't get ethics. So they can do whatever the hell they please, in whatever way they please, and they can easily blame whatever they do on another state by leaving breadcrumbs to mimic specific state activity.
Okay, so we're talking about how states attack other states for strategic purposes. Let's bring it down to an individual scale, because our information as individuals can also be compromised in the process. So what's your take on that, and what should we do to at least defend ourselves? I can give you one simple example. If you take the case of the hack of Exchange, maybe there's some type of information on email that we shouldn't be exchanging. Especially at a technical level, a lot of people in companies don't even realize it, but they're exchanging usernames and passwords over an email. So how can they better, how do we do to protect ourselves? I know it's always a question of, conditioning ourselves and training ourselves to start acting differently, because these threats just keep on coming and they change nonstop. Sure.
I mean, that's a really good point. I'd start with just some basic security awareness training. That's probably the best, most effective way to start, as far as.
And it's inexpensive.
And it's inexpensive, exactly. From a pure ROI perspective, that is a no-brainer. Right?
Yeah, because what's the percentage of hacks that occur because of human error?
Nowadays, if I understand correctly, it's 60%.
That's tremendous.
It's very, very high. It's like in the past few years, because obviously it is, because phishing is the best metric, the best threat vector you could possibly use. I can send an email, I can send a WhatsApp message, Facebook message, LinkedIn message, Discord message. There's so many possibilities, so many vectors. So the fact that you're aware that these things exist is probably the single most helpful thing you can do to protect yourself. Other than that, it's just it's okay, and this might put some CTOs in trouble. But I'm personally not a fan of 365, and I'll tell you why. Because every one of my customers on the cybersecurity side, every one of my customers that's moved to 365 has experienced some kind of cyber attack. Why? Because everybody is using 365 now. So it's like you're choosing to be a fish in the sea. Now you can either be a mackerel and swim with the other mackerels and be targeted by swordfish and whales and fishing nets, or you can be like a sole and you can chill at the bottom of the ocean and you can be inconspicuous. Sure, an animal can come and just eat you and remove you from existence. But
so sometimes the best way to stay safe is actually not to follow the trend and not always think, well, yeah, everybody's going to the cloud and using cloud services with SaaS, software as a service, and the rest. But everything that's exposed to the internet is a liability.
Exactly. And to add to that, I'm sorry, there's a reason why government militaries don't use cloud. And we should learn from that.
Good point. Very good point. And that brings me to the next idea. When you think about the internet, originally it was a military network, am I correct?
Mm-hmm.
So
Same thing with a Darknet, no?
yes. Well, the Darknet maybe is a little different because it's basically an internet that is not indexed. It might be running maybe on a technology that's a little different because it doesn't have DNS or... well, because let's talk maybe about the little difference that there's between Darknet and Dark Web.
Darknet and Dark Web. How would you define the difference?
Okay, the Dark Web is, for example, a company intranet. Or it can actually be exposed at some point on the internet, but it's not indexed by search engines and it's not made public, as where the dark net would actually be the onion websites running on the Tor network.
Fair enough.
So that's where that's how I distinguish dark web and dark net. Not to say that as long as there's the word dark, that it means that its intent is to sell drugs, firearms, and hire hitmen.
No, not necessarily. I mean, like, we have to understand and remember that the internet that we have access to, in reality, is not the real internet. We have access to 10% of the internet. The remaining 90 lies on the dark web. So is that, or the dark net, dark web? I'm getting confused
Well,
now.
dark web is the one that's not evil.
Okay, yeah, so we have to remember that we're actually only accessing a really small part of the network. And just because something isn't on the internet doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. We have to remember that governments make requests to take down sites on a daily basis. They make these requests to Google. And if you're dead on Google, you're dead, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you're necessarily doing anything wrong. It's just, the big brother might not like you.
Is it better for governments to take care of their own security, or should they work with a combination of internal and external services, or outsource the security entirely?
The latter will never be an option. A government will never outsource the security entirely. It'll never happen in a million years. They should primarily take control over it themselves, which is what they'll do, but they will always need a third party to verify. Purely because of bias. Like every security company in the world gets a security audit just to have a sort of third 4i principle, no? Essentially. Yes. So yeah, that's the solution.
That concludes this episode of Deep Tech. I'd like to thank my guest Jean-Michel Azzopardi, CCO of Infrinity, for joining me. And we will make sure to invite him again for subsequent episodes where we will have some very interesting subjects to discuss. Thank you very much for being here, and I'll see you next time for a new episode of Deep Tech.